It's been an exciting week, this inauguration week, right? Speeches and poems and dances and Bibles and lots of excitement, lots of excitement. Of course, to hear the newscasters speak about it, the most exciting thing of the whole week was Michelle Obama's new haircut, right? I mean, let's get our priorities straight, right? She's got this new haircut, brand new, never been seen before, with bangs. Go figure. And then what she's wearing is always all the rage, right? I mean, a little bling, right? And then, it's like, I'm just wanting to say there are trendsetters and there's trend followers. Some of us have had bangs for a while now. Oh, isn't it ridiculous? I mean, really, this powerful woman and all they can talk about is her clothes. But I guess you take the publicity as it comes, right? So our theme for this year is living the empowered life. We're in the middle of January where we've been speaking about the theme of purpose, how purpose contributes to living the empowered life. When you live your life on purpose, you are clear, you are focused, and you are empowered. And so we've talked about how to create your mission statement, your purpose statement, and I love you sending them into me. Keep sending them into me, especially those of you who are watching this on video as a part of our virtual community. I love seeing your mission statements. Every time I receive one, I pray over it and just see that happening for you. And then last week, we talked about the fact that part of living the empowered life is being prepared when the opportunity arises. Being prepared, spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally prepared. And you know that it's been said that luck is simply the meeting of opportunity and preparation. Opportunity and preparation. But here's the thing about preparation. It's important, but it's kind of a two-edged sword. You can over-prepare. If you think that you can't take the next step until you are 100% fully prepared, guess what? You will never take the next step. You'll be stuck in preparation mode forever and never move forward. So that's what we want to talk about today, is how it is that we're going to take the next step, whatever is your step to take. Tama Kieves is the author of the book Inspired and Unstoppable, Wildly Succeeding in Your Life's Work. And many of you had the opportunity to see her when she came to speak here. She was once a high-powered attorney, and now today she's following her dream, which is to be an inspiring coach and author and lecturer and speaker. But it wasn't always that way. When she first got started on this road to her dream, well, she lived in a little bitty apartment that was just the side entrance to somebody else's house. She says that she had holes in her linoleum floor and a big old spot on the bathroom wall, and yet her home was the only place she had to hold workshops, so she'd invite people into her home, such as it was. And here's what she had to say about that bathroom in particular with the big spot on the wall. She said, "To me, it may as well have been a polar bear or a flashing disco ball, because I bet a movie star could have stood in that bathroom handing out autographs, and I would have seen only the stain. I wanted to hang a sign next to it apologizing for it and for the choices that I made in general in my life." Have you ever felt like that? I mean, everything might be going well, but all you can see is the one thing that's not going just right, and it's like it's a neon flashing light at you. Here's what's wrong. Here's what's wrong. Here's what's wrong. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, she knew. See, what made it even harder for her was she knew what environment you should have an inspirational workshop in, but she didn't have it. She says, "I didn't have an office space with bamboo fountains, marble floors, and a waiting area with tapestry chairs and a guest book. I didn't have the blonde secretary. I had an alarmed cat. I had my small, non-air-conditioned apartment with an entrance on the side of a Victorian house. But," and here's the key, "but I moved forward because I needed to teach with all my soul. She moved forward because she needed to. That was her next step. Friends, I got to tell you that the greatest projects in the world, some of the greatest projects in the world failed. Not because they were bad ideas, but because someone never took the first step. And so I'm reminded that Lao Tzu once said in the Tao Te Ching that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. But taking that first step sometimes is so hard. Things get in the way of it, right? And one of the things that gets in the way of it is perfectionism. Now, as a card-carrying member of the Recovering Perfectionists support group, I've written this lesson today just for me. Now, if the rest of you want to listen in, that's just fine. But today's lesson is for me. Okay, so I know a thing or two about what I'm speaking about today, and I'm hoping that by the end of the lesson I will have taken in some of these teachings and be able to more fully embody them than ever before. Perfectionism. Perfectionism is that illusion that says that things will ever be perfect and that you're going to wait till they're perfect before you take the next step, right? And so guess what? Sometimes you never take the next step. She says perfectionism, or thinking you can only start with airtight credentials or airbrushed opportunities or the ideal schedule, is not your ally. To me, it's the fussy ant of procrastination. Perfectionism holds you back and tells you you have standards. Those aren't standards, they're issues. Ooh, kind of hurts, doesn't it? Okay, so by the laughter, I'm thinking that some of you in the room might just understand a little bit about perfectionism. The thing is, it immobilizes you. Let me give you an example from my own life. Now, today I've been told that I have made a little bit of progress in this area, so that's a good thing. I hope I have. I hope I have. But one of the things that really, oh my gosh, triggers my perfectionism is packing to move. I'm aware of that right now because we have several people who are moving from one apartment to another or moving out of town, that sort of thing. So they're in the midst of packing to move. And I hate the thought of it. Because you know what happens to me when I've got to pack up a house to move? So I stand there in the middle of the room, and I got my box, and I see all the items that could go into the box. And I start to pick up an item, but then I think, well, that doesn't match that item. I actually think I want to give this item, I'm going to give this item to Ken Lovern. And so I should put it on the side here. Now then this item, well, no, it doesn't. No, that's like paper. So paper items need to go in the box over there. That's just for paper. And, you know, and I just stand there and stare. I just get immobilized because I can't conceive of a perfect way to pack it. And so I get immobilized. Now, good thing for me, I married Brian. Brian packs differently. And I'm so grateful for it because if it weren't for Brian, I never would have showed up here in the first place. You see, well, there's lots of truth to that. But I'm talking about specifically with respect to packing because I moved ahead into Overland Park while Brian stayed back in Houston to sell the house. And that meant he got to be the one to pack it up, too. No dummy here. But this is the way Brian packs, right? So Brian's in the room, and he says, oh, here's a lamp. Let's put that in the box. Oh, there's a pair of Patricia's dress pants. Let's put those in the box. Oh, here's a coffee cup. It goes in, too. Tapes it up. Box is done. Now, you think I'm kidding. I know you think I'm kidding. But here's the thing. When those boxes arrived, and it was time to unpack them, it's the truth. So there was the lamp that had to go down to the basement. There were the dress slacks that had to go upstairs to the bedroom, and there was the coffee cup that had to go into the kitchen. I mean, it's the honest to goodness truth. But everything got packed. There was no immobilization there. It got done. We're a great compliment for each other, let me tell you. Perfectionism immobilizes. It gets in the way. It gets in the way because the true perfectionist believes that there is perfection to be attained. And that's not the truth. Nothing is ever perfect enough for the perfectionist. Really, what stops perfectionists in our tracks is this internal question: am I good enough? Is this plan going to be good enough? Is what I execute going to be good enough? And because we're perfectionists, the answer is always no, always no. And therefore, often, we never begin. And that's why she says perfectionism is the fussy ant of procrastination. Sometimes procrastinators will judge themselves and just say, oh my gosh, I'm just lazy, or I'm not creative enough, or whatever. And the truth is, they're just a perfectionist afraid to take that first step. Okay, the second thing that gets in the way, and this really is a kissing cousin, if you will. We're all into families now, aren't we? Okay, this is a kissing cousin of the fear of perfectionism, and it is the fear of failure. The fear of failure. Now, some of you were lucky enough to grow up in families that taught you how to fail, that taught you how to lose, that taught you that life has its bumps. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some, right? Maybe you played a team sport when you were a kid, and you learned that sometimes you're going to catch the ball, and sometimes you're not. And sometimes your team's going to win, and sometimes they're not. But not everyone learned that. In fact, psychologists today are especially concerned about some of the most caring, loving, devoted parents who don't want our kids to ever have the pain of losing or failing or missing the mark. And so we do everything we can to structure their lives so they don't fall. We put cotton batting all around them so they can't fall. But what happens is they grow into adults who don't know how to get turned down, who don't know how to cross those bumps in the road with any air of finesse or grace. So the fear of failure can also stand in the way of ever beginning. If you're afraid you're going to fail, if you're not going to succeed at a project. And here's what's really interesting about what Tama Keefe said. She said, to be free to succeed, you have to be free to fail. To be free to succeed, you have to be free to fail. The two go hand in hand. And she talks about this in the context of learning to ski. She said when she took ski lessons for the first time, her focus was on not falling. Not falling, not falling, not falling, not falling, not falling, not falling. She didn't think about whooshing down the hill and enjoying herself. She just didn't want to fall. So the more she steeled herself against falling, the more she fell, and she was falling more than anyone else in the class. She says, eventually and painfully, I understood that it was safer to relax and fall than to try to prevent all falls. She goes on to say, in skiing, as in life, there will be falls. They don't mean a thing. And the more you relax, the more alert, power, and energy you have to negotiate success. The more you relax, the more alert, power, and energy you have to negotiate success. And she came to realize in her life that she was approaching her new ventures with the goal of not failing instead of succeeding. Now, this voice that tells you not to fail, that is the ego voice. Now, I'm not talking about the strong, healthy ego that moves you forward. I'm talking about that egoic voice that Eckhart Tolle talks about, that voice that is the critic, the inner judge in you. It probably originated with words you might have heard from a parent or some other authority figure, and those tapes play, and they play, and they play, and they say, you better not fail. You better not blow this one like the last one. And before you know it, you're entering into your dream, but your only goal is just not to screw it up, not to fail, right? God, just don't let me fail. You go into the marriage, and maybe all you saw in your own home was a broken marriage. And so you go into it just steeled, saying, I just don't want this to fail. I just don't want to blow this one. And you see how, can you even see how my body's constricted? That's what happens when your focus is on not failing. When Brian and I were first dating and getting to know one another, I once told him, at the young age of 23 that I was, at that point, I said, I failed 3 times in my life. I know. But I was very serious and probably had tears in my eyes when I told him about all 3 times. I can only remember 2 of them today, so I'm only going to tell you those 2. I don't know what the 3rd one was. He probably could tell you, but you don't need to ask him. So, because his memory's lots better than mine. So the first one I'll tell you about is when I was in college. My first major was journalism. I wanted to be a news writer of some sort. And I was writing for the newspaper there at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I went to school. And I heard that there was an internship, a summer internship coming up at the Louisville Courier-Journal. Well, back then, back in the day when newspapers really were king, the Louisville Courier-Journal had a great reputation. It was one of the best known newspapers for its integrity, journalistic integrity in the country. And so I heard about that, and I was from Louisville, and on a lark, I decided to apply. Now, I knew there was no chance I was going to get it, but I decided to apply. Well, nobody was more surprised than I when I got a letter saying that I was one of the 4 finalists. So I got flown into Louisville along with people from elsewhere in the country, flown from North Carolina to Louisville, and I still remember sitting in the country club where they wined and dined us, you know. That was something for a 19-year-old, you know, to be treated to dinner at a country club and looking out at the golf course and all of that. And I began to think, this is going to be so cool. They're going to pick me. I'm from Louisville, of course they'll pick me. They would have invited me here if they weren't going to pick me. Okay, you know the punchline. They didn't pick me. Somebody else got the internship. Vroom, went my self-esteem. Now, the interesting thing about this, and you can already see that, you guys are wiser than I was at age 19. How can you call that a failure? I mean, I actually got selected from a huge pool of candidates to be one of 4 who almost got the internship. I mean, that's really cool, right? No, for me it was a failure. It was a failure. And you know, I've learned something recently. I heard on the radio just the other day that they were talking about Heisman Trophy winners and how those who win the Heisman Trophy live longer than those who are nominated but don't win. 1.5 years or so, I think is what they said. That's pretty interesting. But more interesting yet was that the peers of all of these people who aren't even nominated, they live longer than the ones who are nominated but don't win. So the winners live longer. The ones who aren't nominated live longer. The ones who are nominated and don't win don't live as long. Now, you can just think about that for a while. Not right now because we don't have time, but just think about that for a little while. It says something about what our expectations become and not measuring up to those expectations and fearing failure and feeling we are a failure, and all of that eats away at our insides in one way or another, and then we don't live as long. So fearing failure really is a pretty big deal. All right, so then there was the other big failure in my life. And this also took place in college. I was a little bit older, must have been 20 by this time. And I decided to put together a one-woman show on the poetry of Sylvia Plath. Now, if any of you have ever read Sylvia Plath, you know that for a college student to decide to devote an entire year studying the poetry of a depressed and suicidal woman is not really the best advice. But nevertheless, I picked her, you know, and created the show, wrote the script, did all the blocking, all that stuff, and performed it in our student union. We had these small theaters on the 2nd level, and I performed it. People showed up. First night seemed to go pretty well. Second night, my mother flew in for it. That was a big deal for me, very big. There I was to perform it. People showed up again, except I was about, I don't know, a third or a quarter of the way through, when all of a sudden, I became aware that beneath me, in the big auditorium of the student union, Judy Collins was performing a concert. And her band was playing pretty loud, even for a folk singer that Judy Collins was. You could no longer hear my voice. I wasn't even mic'd. My little auditorium was so small. You could no longer hear my voice. And I distinctly remember as she sang her classic song, Send in the Clowns. Okay, I'm not making this up. Truth is stranger than fiction. I distinctly remember hearing the lyrics of that song. I was a big Judy Collins fan too. Hearing the lyrics of that song thinking, I am the clown today. I was so embarrassed afterwards that I ran and hid. I didn't even want to greet people. I did not show up with elegance at that particular point. And again, I ask you, where was the failure there? Was it my fault Judy Collins showed up? I didn't schedule the activities at the student union, but I carried that with me. So part of the antidote of looking at your life and your experiences, failures or not, is to take every experience and ask yourself, in the midst of what you might have called a failure, could there not also have been your finest hour? I mean, those experiences I just shared, they were actually big accomplishments for me at that time. So think about those of you who have lost a relationship. Maybe you've divorced or been stood up in some way. Think about that relationship. Maybe you decide to call it a failure because it didn't continue, but was it not also an opportunity for some of your finest moments as you were falling in love? I mean, think about the job that you lost or maybe even were fired from. Yeah, maybe you missed the mark, maybe you made a mistake, but were there not possibly other moments in that job that were part of your finest hour? Opportunities for you to show who you were and to grow. So one of the antidotes to this fear of failure is to focus on the successes and not the failures. We know that. We know the power of our minds. We know the power of our words. We know that they are magnetic. And if we focus on the successes, that's what we will reproduce in our lives. We stop focusing on fearing the failure. Then we can move into a place of taking the next step, whatever that is. And the other thing is to realize that everybody's going to miss the mark. Failure is a really harsh word. I don't think anything is a failure. Nothing is a complete failure. Maybe it didn't work as intended. But there are moments of greatness, brilliance, and success in the midst of every single failure. And I could give you all the lists that you know about. I won't go over the list of the Post-it notes that were really an accident that then became the Post-it notes. You know, there's tons of examples like that. And you have them in your life too if you'll only love yourself enough to look at them and realize it. You know, one of the reasons I love the Bible so much is that it gives us lots of examples of imperfection and people who failed. The Bible is full of them. Save Jesus, there's not a perfect character in there, right? And so you look back in the Hebrew scriptures and you see David, who became the great king of the Jewish people and was so highly regarded, he's become known as representing the faculty of love. David was the one you'll remember who fought off Goliath when he was just a kid. And yet, maybe you don't know this part of the story, but David decided he had eyes for his neighbor's wife. But not only eyes for her, because he was in a place of power, he decided to have her husband sent off to war to the front lines where he died. That's a pretty big imperfection to me. Have somebody killed, but yet he went on to accomplish and do great things. People remember David as a great king. And then there's Moses. Well, how many times did Moses have to fail at talking to Pharaoh? I mean, each time, Moses would go into plea to get all the children of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, and he'd plea with he'd plea with Pharaoh, and they'd leave, but then Pharaoh would change his mind, they'd have to go back. Clearly, his mediation skills were not too great, though eventually it worked, right? But Moses didn't even get to go into the promised land, and yet we remember the great leader that Moses was. And so, you see, what I'm saying is, those figures are all in the Bible to remind you and me that, this is the human experience. This is the human experience. So you have a choice as to how you will tell your story. And you have a choice as to the next step that you take or you just sit and look at. And you wonder, am I going to take this step? Am I ready enough? Am I ready enough? Am I perfect enough? Am I perfect enough? Am I good enough? Am I good enough? Have I planned enough? Have I planned enough? Enough with the enoughs. You got to take the step. And you, most of you right now have one in your head. You know the step you're thinking about. You've been thinking about it for a while. Maybe it's time, even if things don't look perfect. I can promise you a couple of things. I can promise you that no matter what your step is, that God loves you and will be with you on that journey. Maybe you heard the words of that beautiful song that was sung before the lesson started, where Molly Hammer sung the words of Wayne Kirkpatrick and Mark Heimerman. Through the darkness, see the light. Remember, God loves you. No matter how dark it looks, no matter how uncertain you are, you will not go this alone. Hafiz, the great Sufi master, wrote a lot about love and God. You read this book, and you just know that Hafiz loved God and knew that God loved him. And it's no truer for Hafiz than it is for you or me. And at the end of one of his poems, he says, "If your love letters are true, dear God, I will surrender myself to who you keep saying I am." If your love letters are true, dear God, I will keep surrendering myself to who you keep saying I am. God has a plan for you. He didn't leave you out of the equation. God has a plan for you. She knows your next step. She will illumine it for you. God will illumine that step for you. So take it. Wherever you are, take that next step and know that you will not be alone.